And I do want to now switch gears a little bit to a movie that dropped on Disney Plus this past weekend, Hocus Pocus 2. You saw it, you reviewed it, and now let her rip.
Plenty of people, according to the internet, people that, by people that I converse with online that are just in that sweet spot in terms of demographics, that they saw the first Hocus Pocus and they were like, between 6 and 9, they had a good time with it. I won't judge them. No, that's not true. I will judge them. I will judge them harshly. But no, it's basically the exact same movie as the first one, which means a couple kids unleash a few witches on Halloween night. Those witches are played by Kathleen and Jimmy, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Bette Midler. And those three overqualified comic performers proceed to basically stand around and quip to each other for 90 minutes. But the jokes aren't very funny. A lot of the culture class humor doesn't make sense. I mean, I don't want to be a nitpicker here, but there's several scenes in which they are shocked and astounded by technology that absolutely existed in 1993, the first time they came back to Salem. But I digress.
So the jokes are a little old, you're saying?
Well, it's confusing because, like, they know what another, they've been to 1993 Salem. They know what a convenience store is. They could have visited a Walgreens or a 7-Eleven, but whatever. Yeah. These are nitpicks that if the movie was any good, I wouldn't care.
But does it matter? Do you think it matters if the movie was good or not? Because people are watching this, to recall their childhood.
That's why I judge you. Because that's how the nostalgia wins. You put out this stuff, it's a new Willow, it's a new Hocus Pocus, it's a new Gilmore Girls, they're back.
To be fair, I
doesn't matter if the stuff is any good or not, because enough people will watch it to clog the social media feeds and create the impression of success.
But was anyone expecting Hocus Pocus 2 to be an Oscar contender?
No, but I was hoping it'd be a decent movie, just because you have the protection of IP, you have the protection of the brand, so you can have a little fun with it. You can use your imagination and truly update the mythology. And I knew they were never going to do this, but I almost was hoping for a comedic version of It Chapter 2, where the kids from 29 years ago get that scary phone call saying, Mike, they're back.
That would have been awesome. But has the response been negative like you, or has it been well received?
Well, statistically speaking, to the extent that I've done the research, smart, intelligent, thoughtful moviegoers of sound mind and character have informed us that it's a terrible, terrible movie. However, sad, pathetic, nostalgic losers who can't. No, I'm kidding. I'm just being sure. No, I mean, the people that wanted a Hocus Pocus sequel got what they wanted out of it.
Good.
And I mentioned this in my review, and I think it's important, to the discourse. I don't begrudge the movie for existing. But I do kind of, this is one of the things about the streaming wars that have driven me nuts, is that these films and shows that 20 years ago would have been direct to video, direct to VHS, direct to whatever irrelevancies are now essential, must succeed, big deal chess pieces in a giant chessboard for global Hollywood domination. And as much as I made fun of the idea of a Space Jam 2 sequel coming 25 years after the first one, and at least that film had $150 million of production value, which, it looks good in theaters.
But it wasn't well received, right? Space Jam 2?
No. And it also cost $150 million, which was nuts for a Space Jam sequel. You cap that at 90 and you hope for the best, even in non-COVID times. It was an okay performing movie on a COVID curve when theaters were just, but again, generally speaking, not to get into something I bring up almost every other day, and I apologize, most of the films that opened amid COVID did about as well as I would have done in non-COVID times, with a few exceptions here and there. So I'm inclined to argue that Space Jam 2, which I know it opened with $31 million. I think it did about 150 worldwide on a 150 budget, did about as well as it would have done in non-COVID times. Yeah, it did 163 million worldwide, which on a 90 million would have been a disappointment, a flop, but nobody would have gotten murdered over it. It was an okay performer on HBO Max, to my knowledge, but again, that stuff's all buried under, pounds and pounds of secrecy. But even that film, my son who barely was, had seen the first Space Jam once and whatever. He liked it. He liked the sequel. It was entertaining to him. He laughed at some of the jokes, even if he didn't get the references, which is a good test if the jokes work despite, with or without nostalgia. He was bored as silly by Hocus Pocus too. And it was funny. Neither of them have seen the first one. All three of my kids, none of them seen the first one. And my oldest ones, the 15-year-old and the 11-year-old, were both, pointing out issues with the sequel that were like, yeah, that was the problem with the first one too. Yeah, that was the problem with the first one too as well.
Oh,
So,
wow.
if you go into it with no nostalgia, there's just not a lot of there.
Yeah.
And in 1993, I might argue that a film like Hocus Pocus, that was a PG-rated Disney horror comedy with dead children and sexy witches and two young teen protagonists that both wanted to bone each other, which was just subversive enough in 1993 to make kids think they were getting away with something. This was back when there was a much sharper dividing line between kids films and adult films. Now, I mean, you have $200 million all ages PG-13 action fantasies. And frankly, not to be lecherous here, but the one thing that stood out about Hocus Pocus was that it was kind of horny. This film is not horny. I'm not saying it should be, but you're forgetting why people like the first one.
So, bottom line, you're not a fan of Hocus Pocus, but the nostalgia carries it through. You're saying. So if you like,
and you have very, very low standards.
So low standards, but fun-loving individual. Hocus Pocus 2 is for you, is what you're saying.
Save yourself.